We'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for another program brought to you by the Laguna Beach Historical Society. As a means of introduction, my name is Greg DiNicola. I'm the Vice President of the Historical Society. And to my right is Gene Felder, and to his right is our guest. Before I really decided to study the history of Laguna Beach, I kind of assumed that it started by a couple of artists coming to town in the 1800s, maybe in a stagecoach, doing plein air, and they loved how beautiful it was here, so they called two friends, and they called two friends, and so on, and it created an artist colony, and that's how our city came to be. There might be a slight sliver of truth in that, but that's actually not at all how it came to be. If you're not familiar, it probably came about because of something that happened in Washington, D.C. in 1862 in the middle of a horrific civil war. President Abraham Lincoln signed in 1862 the Homestead Act. It was a very simple concept. Federal land was awarded to anyone who could apply. They had three main criteria. They had to have never taken up arms against the country. They had to live on the land for 5 years and somehow improve it. I guess a very common way to improve land quickly and easily and cheaply was planting trees, and I'm told that's hence why there's so many eucalyptus trees around these parts. It's part of the Homestead Act. It was intended to keep Western lands in the hands out of the hands of the Southern slave owners. What isn't appreciated is how important this was in establishing our town as a populated city. In the early 1870s, names such as Thurston and Brooks were awarded several hundred acres near Aliso Creek and Bluebird Canyon. And in 1873, a gentleman named Henry Rogers came to Orange County, down this way, loved it, sent for his wife Elizabeth. She liked it so much, she sent out for 22 other family members, and the Rogers invaded our area here. In 1878, Henry became the fifth homesteader, acquiring 160 acres. And 3 years later, in 1881, his son, George, bought 156 acres all around this area, downtown. Matter of fact, he built a ranch house, I believe, where we're sitting right now, City Hall. I'm guessing this might have been the dining room. He might have gone down to Main Beach and got a local lobster and be eating it right where you're sitting, and who knows. He named Forest and Ocean. He subdivided downtown into 323 individual lots that are still here and working out fine. And what about Henry? Well, Henry went on to have grandkids, great-grandkids, great-great-grandkids, and even great-great-great-grandkids. And we are thrilled he did, because we have one of them with us here tonight as our speaker. It's been my pleasure to become a friend and colleague of Carol Lloyd, our speaker tonight. She's become a very valuable member of the Historical Society Board of Directors. She tells me as a child, her mother had 25 relatives living here in town. She herself was born in Whittier, grew up in Orange County. Her parents, George and Beryl Viebeck, owned a very successful bakery in Santa Ana. It's a little-known fact that Carol is an excellent swimmer, and as a matter of fact, qualified for the 1964 Olympic trials in swimming. Her alma mater is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and since she's a member of our board, appropriately, her major was history. She went to the prestigious Johns Hopkins to get her master's, and she became an expert in the field of dyslexia and reading therapy. In fact, she published 3 manuals for teachers and parents to use with affected children. 15 years ago, she came back to her roots here in Laguna Beach and rejoined the family homestead she'll be talking tonight about. She recently retired after 35 years in education, in that time including developing a successful reading clinic. But Carol isn't really retired. She's very active with our Historical Society. She continues to work as a reading specialist here in Laguna with local students. She has 2 adult children of her own and 5 grandkids. One of here, I think, is here tonight. If I'm doing the math right, it makes her grandchild the great-great-great-great-grandchild of Henry Rogers. So the Rogers homestead and legacy will be around for many years to come, it seems. From my personal point of view, it has been extremely enjoyable working closely with Carol at the Historical Society. She brings an infectious enthusiasm, an outstanding wealth of knowledge of Laguna history, and tonight this will be very important. She's a real teacher, and she has an overwhelming desire and ability to spread her knowledge of Laguna history to current and future generations of Lagunans. So I'm really looking forward to her talk tonight. So now, ladies and gentlemen, join me in an enthusiastic welcome for my friend and colleague, Carol Lloyd.
Wow, that was really wonderful. It wasn't, my goodness, who is that person? Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Greg, for the wonderful introduction. And you also, and all the members of the Historical Society and the board are such good friends. And that's, I think, what's most important for me, is if I'm going to be associated with a group of people, whether it's at church or whether it's a volunteer in the community, I really like that friendship that is developed, and that's what I'm finding with the Historical Society. But I also want to thank those of you who are my friends who have arrived and your smiling faces in the audience. I really appreciate you being here. I also want to welcome those of you who I don't know and look forward to getting to know as time goes on, because I think we're all here to have a passion, that we have a passion and curiosity, whether we have ancestors here or not. We could have our ancestors in the Midwest, back east, across the oceans, in the South. Wherever we have those ancestors, we are the legacy that has been brought forward from them. And that's what I'm going to speak about tonight. But also I want to, I couldn't pass up the opportunity to welcome my family here. My daughter, Lindsay, who is filming me right now, and if you can raise your hand, and her husband, Sean, and they live in Mission Viejo. And then I have 3 grandsons, their children. And Curran, raise your hand. Brody, raise your hand, and Sutton, raise your hand. And I have Elle, my brand new granddaughter. I have 6 grandchildren. She is my only granddaughter. And Elle, can you wave? Can you wave? Maybe. So my son and his wife and my other 2 grandsons live up in San Jose, and they're here in spirit with me. So beyond all that, I'm glad you're here this evening. I'm looking forward, and I thank the Historical Society for giving me this opportunity to share about my family. I am so honored to have this happen, because my mother, as I'll talk about later and as Greg brought up, has done so much for our family heritage and left an incredible legacy. She now has Alzheimer's, and she doesn't remember me nor our family members, and doesn't have a clue where Laguna Beach even is. And that is amazing to me, because she did such a tremendous amount of work, enduring a lot of obstacles in the way. And I'm not going to get emotional tonight. I did a little bit the last time, but I'm going to try very hard not to get too emotional tonight. So I'm going to be talking tonight about not only Henry and George Rogers, who Greg brought up, but I'm also going to be putting into this talk about my mother and her work. It's kind of they parallel each other and they cross over, and as the speaker of that, it's kind of hard to figure out where do I put all that together. So I hope that I can make it as clear as I can for you this evening. We're going to be turning off the lights soon, and that will give me a chance then to actually read my notes. I don't want to get anything out of alignment in what my mother has shared with me throughout the years and has written down. So I'm going to be reading some of it. I know a lot of it already, but I feel like it's important to really speak as correctly as I can about our history. So it's about Henry Rogers and his son, George Rogers, and how they overcame their daily struggles and obstacles to pursue their dreams and to leave a legacy for future generations, as I being one of them. The legacy that they left is an inspiration to me to my family, because in those times of struggle that we all go through, isn't it wonderful to look back on our pioneering members of our family and say, you know what, look at what they did. Look at what they went through. This is not even close to coming out to a primitive area with bears and lions and mountain cats, etc. And it really gives me that close inspiration that I need at times on a daily basis. So I look to that for inspiration, and then that we all have a heritage. We're all living that day to day to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. So moving on, this is my mother. And she also spoke in Laguna Beach. And as I'm talking about her tonight, this evening, I will be talking about her primary research that she did in searching out our grandparents and our ancestors more. But I also will be talking about the homestead, the map that she developed as a result of all that research. She now, again, as I mentioned, has Alzheimer's, but she's being well taken care of, and we visit often. She is 93 at this point. So, and many of you in the audience have known my mother, and I thank you for that friendship of her, and I appreciate that. And by the way, Gene Felder is an incredible historian in our community. He's been behind the Historical Society for so long. And my friend, Jane Jantz, who's in the back, has become such a dear friend of mine, who is also an incredible historian, and also both of them friends of my parents. So, I can't speak of my mother without sharing a little bit about my father. Definitely, this is Lloyd Viebeck, who has been gone now for about 2.5 years, and he was quite the wonderful character. He, if any of you knew him, had a charming, wonderful way about him, and he helped to partner with my mother in all of her wonderful historical efforts that she put out. So they were a partnership throughout their marriage and even toward the end. They ran a successful bakery together in Orange County in Santa Ana, and so as a result had to stay up in that area to buy out my dad's parents and run that bakery. So my mother always wanted to live down here in Laguna with all of her relatives, but never got the chance to. So now before I start talking about Henry, I might not have time at the end to have a question and answer, but if we do, that'd be great. If not, that's why my little grandsons gave you a fill-out form that you might have seen or have in your lap. If you want to write any questions or comments on that, we can pick them up at the end, and I will get back to you. I don't know if I put a place for an email on there. Oh gosh, how can I resist? We won't interrupt too much with this, I promise you. And then the second thing is at the end, I'm glad you're up here, Sean, my son-in-law will be selling my mother's print of her homestead map that we have printed out, and the money will be donated to the Historical Society and the Alzheimer's Association. So if you're interested, he'll be over there with the information that you'll need to have. Okay? Alrighty. Okay, so moving along, our history in Laguna Beach started with Henry Rogers, who is 6 generations back from myself. And as Greg mentioned, in 1973, he decided to move from Galena, Illinois, and move out west because, and I'll share with you the reasons why in just a minute, but I wanted, and a good friend of mine suggested that we do a generational lineage of our family, so it's a little more clear to see it in this way. Henry Rogers came here in 1873 and married before in Illinois, Elizabeth Jane Wilkinson. He is my great-great-great-grandfather. He had a son, George Rogers. He's the 2nd generation. He married Charlotte Lottie Clapper, which some of you might know historically as being very involved in history, and also his sister, Mary Ann Rogers, who married Henry Wayman. And that is the direct lineage, Mary, down to Jenny Wayman Bruneau Johnson, who is my great-grandmother. And so it goes from all the way down to the 6th generation. Jenny Wayman Bruneau Johnson married Abe Johnson the first after her divorce, early divorce from her first husband, Edward Bruneau, and married Abe Johnson back in Illinois, and they moved out here, and he became the first chief of police of Laguna. And some of you might know the Johnson family. Her sister was Ora Wayman Bruneau Warling, and Warling is another name in Laguna Beach that you might have heard about. And so this is basically how it goes, and my mother, of course, right above me. So moving on, during this time, and I think it's real important to possibly get an idea and a perspective of what was happening, as Greg mentioned even, with the Civil War and the Homestead Act, what was happening in the United States during the period from 1850 even to 1880, when Henry Rogers was back in Galena, Illinois. So you can see these were huge events that occurred, none of which I need to go through with you, but I just want, and except for the bottom one for my son-in-law. In 1875, the most important event on this page might be the first professional baseball league was formed. Other than that, all of these probably take second place. You note, though, in the United States in 1870, look at the amount of people already who lived here. And in 20 years, it already had increased almost 30%. So moving on to then Henry. Henry lived originally in Cornwall, England with his parents. He was born in 1822. And at 17 years old, he came with his parents and his brother Richard to Galena, Illinois. Eventually to Galena. They moved from New York to Ohio and then finally to Galena. And in that time period, as he grew up there, they had a farm that they harvested, but when that farm went dormant, they worked in the lead mines in Galena, Illinois. And Galena looked like, I think, this during that time, and you can see the whatever you call it, I don't know if it's called smoke or not, but from the lead mines and all the production of that, and that's the Mississippi River right next to Galena. Beyond that, this is the environment in which they worked in on the lead mines, and of course, at that age, and without the safety requirements, of course, there was tremendous amount of harm to them with the lung disease that they acquired. Now, back in that time period when Henry was thinking of moving out because of the harm that those lead mines possibly had done to him and his family members, he also, and many of them saw this advertisement back there, California for better health and better climate. And that was kind of the thing that pushed him beyond a reason. So he decided to come on out and down the Mississippi River in a paddle wheel boat, leaving his wife and there, at that time, 2 children, although 2 or 3 other boys had died back there at a very young age. And remember, his children at this time were George Rogers and his daughter, Mary Ann Wayman, who is my direct line. He came down around the Cape Horn area. He caught a steamship in New Orleans and made that trek all the way up. I don't know if this is how he went, but basically all the way up to San Francisco. And they kept their sails on those steamships to make sure that they made it around that cape. That was very important to keep those sails up during that time. And this is another picture of those boats that they went on. The people back in Galena were waiting for him to telegraph them when he arrived here to tell them, should you come or not? Should you bring everybody out here or not? And while he finally arrived down in Orange County, the Edwards family from Westminster, who arrived in 1872, picked him up from San Pedro and brought him to live with them for a year. So they had a place to stay for that time period. And the Edwards family is a lineage from Edwards Theater, eventually, and that they knew them back in Galena. So he wrote back to Elizabeth, "Dearest Elizabeth, sell everything, gather as many family and friends who want to come and come." Elizabeth was 44 years old. Henry was 51. So that's Elizabeth 1 year before she died here in Santa Ana in Laguna. But she was a brave and venturous woman to do what she did. He married her at 27 years old while they were in Illinois, and so that was all that was back there is what she and he both left. This is another picture of her with my mother's sister, and when she was a small child. So they took a train trip across the United States from Omaha, Nebraska, and there were 22 of them on that train. 13 of them were family members, 4 generations of family members, and the others were friends, and many of them sold their 2-story homes, of which she had a lovely one, we've heard, and sold their farms and headed on out together. This is a list of those people that were on the train. I've kind of finally gathered, and in recognition and desire to honor my mother, I continue to delve into more and more things and gather more information and kind of basically pile up piles beyond what she also had. So I put together the list of the 22, and there's George, and he was on his honeymoon with his wife, the son of Elizabeth and Henry, and then his wife, their daughter, and she was married to Henry Wayman, and they moved on. Here's Henry Wayman. They had children. And so it goes on, and Sam Edwards was there. All of these people came across, and you might recognize Joe Prisk was a cousin of Henry Rogers, and he was very instrumental and also had a homestead right after Henry had a homestead. So all these people ventured out with my great-great-great-grandmother also. So the Transcontinental Railroad, as Abraham Lincoln had signed it, did bring everybody, a lot of people, and encouraged a lot of people to come out to the West. And just 5 years after that was signed is when they went across. Amazing. Amazing to see this one woman. And I love my men in our family, but the women are also very remarkable. They both men and women went through tremendous amounts of obstacles in their lives. So they went from Omaha, leaving Galena, Illinois, and came over to Promontory Point, where the Golden Stake in Utah was pounded in, and it eventually arrived in San Francisco. And of course, this is the same trail. So one railroad, I believe it was the Union, and the Continental merged, and that's what happened to them. My great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth, rented 2 boxcars, and they did go second class. This isn't the picture of it, but it's probably something very similar to it. She rented 2 boxcars on the train with 22 travelers for 3.5 weeks. They were very frugal, so they did not buy first-class tickets. They were second-class tickets. First class only took 4 days, 4 to 5 days. But because of the 3.5 weeks, they stopped at many train depots and bathed and relaxed and did whatever. So it gave them that opportunity also to clean up. But for two boxcars full of 22 members of the train trip in one boxcar, and the other boxcar had some cattle, horses, small animals. They also had barrels of ham and piccadilly, which is a relish, and sauerkraut and apples that they put on those. They were barrels full of that, and they put that on that boxcar. So to talk further about that time that occurred, I want to make sure I don't miss any kind of interesting, and I find this information kind of exciting and fun. I hope you do too. It's not talking yet about the homesteads of Laguna Beach, but it gives us, I think, or at least myself, a little bit of appreciation, definitely, for what they went through. So the 2 boxcars filled, and they were on their way. They landed in San Francisco, and then eventually by steamship came down to San Pedro and were picked up by Henry and the Edwards family. And they stayed at that Edwards family compound in Westminster for approximately a year. So when Henry came, and in 1879, he went on and acquired the 5th homestead of Laguna Beach. And it covered 160 acres from Temple Hills to the Mesa area of Bluebird Canyon. And he went on to build a 2-story house to prove up, as Greg mentioned, that they had to prove up with that Homestead Act on Temple Hills. And Frank Goff, who many of you might have heard of already, helped on Henry's Bee Ranch. And the Bee Ranch also was was set up to prove up also, and it was a successful bee ranch that Henry instigated on that homestead. So Frank Goff helped at that bee ranch, and he lived in the two-story house that Henry had built there on Temple Hills. Finally, Frank Goff got his own homestead, and that house was empty. But in the meantime, after Abraham Lincoln put together that Homestead Act, and I'll talk about my mother's map in just a minute, that Homestead Act did bring, and it did have limitations, but it did bring a tremendous amount of people out west. You had to be 21 years old, and you had to buy it for a small amount. It cost $18 to even register to get a homestead. And then the stipulations that Greg brought up, that you had to be pro the union. You couldn't be against it. And interestingly enough, immigrants could, and this is what I've researched, immigrants, farmers without their own land, single women, and former slaves could all qualify to buy a homestead, to get a homestead. So I found that really interesting, and if that is what Abraham Lincoln was all about, what an amazing president beyond what we already know that he was. So at this point, though, I'm going to be reading from, for a short time, a story that my mother wrote. So these are in her own words, that she wrote for the Orange County Scene in 1990. And it kind of shares what she also is saying about this time period. She says, 112 years later, after Henry arrived in 1873, my researching began only because my grandmother, Jenny Wayman Johnson, who you noticed up there, told me that when I was little, my grandfather, Henry Rogers, owned a piece of government land in Laguna Beach sometime after 1873. So this is her grandmother telling my mother, our family owned some government land in Laguna Beach, but she did not know where it was, what happened to it, or anything like that. So my mother, all that time, was curious, what was this government land? So also in 1991, my mother says, I reread a 70-year-old speech that my grandmother, Jenny Johnson, had given to the Laguna Beach Women's Club in 1938. And my great-grandmother, Jenny Johnson, was a charter member of the Women's Club, as also she was of Laguna Beach Presbyterian Church right here across the street, of which I'm a member now, and I'm so thrilled to be there. She talked about her grandfather, Henry Rogers, owning the government land in her speech, and that she mentioned, as she had mentioned to me, she didn't share how much land, where it was, or what happened to it. My mother, aunts, uncles also didn't know the answers. So in search of these answers, I spent the next few years looking through every bit of Laguna Beach history that I could. In a moment of determination, I started calling government offices that might be responsible for this land information. Now, I'm sharing this because the end result of all my mother's research about our family, and you can't see it right now, but that's her original homestead map that she did put together. And she gave it to me, and I guard it with my life because she put so many tremendous amount of hours into it. So in producing that map as a product of all of her research, this is then basically her story about what created that. So she had called Riverside, and they referred her to the United States Bureau of Land Management, and this was in the mid-1990s. While there on the phone, they said, yes, we have information on your great-great-grandfather's government land. She was absolutely thrilled. She says she was floored. I knew that she was going up there. I had tracked a lot of what she and my father had been doing about research. In fact, I helped them to a certain extent. And she called me that minute that she heard that on the phone, and she couldn't be more excited. And I always felt that I was her encourager and her, okay, Mom, you can do this, you can do this. And she says, I was just floored. George, my husband, volunteered to drive the 400 miles to Sacramento. While there, after an hour of research, I couldn't believe my eyes. But I had found the microfilm version of the original homestead document issued to my great-great-grandfather, Henry Rogers. And nobody had ever found that in her family, of course. Each homestead had to be signed by one of our presidents. Henry Rogers' homestead deed was the fifth Laguna Beach homestead and was signed by Rutherford B. Hayes in 1879. She went on to say Ulysses S. Grant had signed the first 3, and excitingly enough, what she did with all that information, and I have it, if I can see, and I have my little flashlight just for this reason. While up there, she had Xeroxed off all the microfilm of every one of the 39 homesteaders in Laguna Beach, and this is her notebook. So every deed to a homestead on microfilm, she Xeroxed off up there with my father and produced it and put them all in this notebook. So all of the homesteads at that time, and the homestead time period only lasted up until, I believe, 1920. Is that right, Jean, or do you know? Do you know? Okay, all right, okay. So this is the map that she developed, and she spent painstaking hours on it, and I remember often going over to her house and seeing that map laid out on her big rectangular table with piles of research. And I really noticed her markers that she had, her black markers, and her yardstick. Her yardstick was a critical piece for her. She loved her yardstick because she put everything from those titles on this map. And she got this map from Laguna Beach for $3. It was a modern street map, and it's right over there. And she placed everything that she had found in those titles, not only our own family, but every one of the 39 homesteaders she had placed on that map. And it took her a tremendous amount of time and effort, of course, to do it. So I could go over this further, of which maybe there's another time that I can speak, because I had to cross out so many PowerPoint parts of my PowerPoint because there are just too many stories to share. But this is where, and I would bring it up closer, but I probably will be talking about this at another time. But on this map, there's Henry Rogers' homestead right there from Temple Hills over to Bluebird Canyon. There's Oscar Warling, who was the husband of Ora Warling, the sister of my great-grandmother, and she laid out all of these homesteads, and all she could do was look at the marks of the titles and try her best to put them into the position that they were on this map. And then my mother, as my daughter and Sean know, her handwriting was incredible. She loved graphics, she loved calligraphy, and I watched her so painstakingly on this map write every name of every homesteader. Carefully. I don't even think she used a yardstick underneath that. She might have. She had taken calligraphy as a high school student, and from that point on, she loved that. So this is just an example of the list of homesteaders, because there were 3 townships that were developed from her research that she put on. So if tonight you're interested, you will be able to really research that out more. So that's basically about my mother's motivation to continue to research our family, and found out a tremendous amount, and yet at the same time was able to put it all into a wonderful map. And she did all that, as I remember her often saying to me, "Carol, I did this for my family, for you, to know more about your relatives and your ancestors, but I also did it for the people of Laguna Beach, so they could appreciate what came before them." And it was amazing that she said that, because I thought, well, wait a minute. I thought you just did it for us. But my mother, truthfully, was a very giving person, and she often said that, don't forget, this is also for the people of Laguna Beach. So I'm just not in awe of my mother, but I am so honored to be her daughter. So going beyond then the train from Galena and Henry getting that first homestead, let me catch up with where I was. So let's go on to George Rogers. Now, Henry had still maintained his homestead, and his son lived out of the area for 6 years and decided to move with his wife, Charlotte, they called her Lottie, to Laguna Beach to be with his family. So I'm going to be talking about George Rogers, who's the great-great-uncle, my great-great-uncle, and brother of Mary Ann Rogers, who is my great-great-grandmother. And this is generation two. It's generation two, Henry being one. That's Mary Jane Rogers, my great-great-grandmother, and she has a look that I can see my great-grandmother, Jenny Johnson, Jenny Bruneau Johnson. I see the look in her. And going on now to, and Mary ended up losing her first husband and married another time, and they ended up farming in Garden Grove area. So Mary definitely was in the community, but she did move out of the area after her first husband had died and she remarried. So this is Uncle George Rogers. We unfortunately, from what I can tell, do not have a picture of Henry, but I can't believe that he might not have looked a little bit like George. So Henry then came down and was able to buy 155 acres, 55 and a half acres from the Rawson brothers, and they bought that homestead for $500 from John Dameron. And that was in Laguna Canyon, from Canyon Acres Road down to 3rd Avenue, up to Mystic Hills, and over to Park, down to the water's edge, Coast Highway at that time, down to Main Beach, and then the northern boundary was Broadway. And it came back up to Canyon Acres, and it included the Sawdust Festival area, Big Bend area, and Art Fair area. So that's the one that he bought from the Rawson brothers, and he bought it for $1,000 gold. He probably had that gold from working in the lead mines in Galena, but my research doesn't show where that gold came from, but it'll show up somewhere, I'm sure. This is his wife and their oldest daughter, Sarah. When they came from Galena on the train, they had 4 children. When they lived here, they had 4 more. They moved away from here, and I believe they had 2 or 3 more. So they were a fairly large family compared to their father, Henry, who really had a small family, and yet with children dying in Galena, even that much smaller with the two children that they had, George and Mary Jane. So they then, and this is their family, aren't they cute? And this is Sarah, the oldest daughter, and the story about Sarah is that she and her father planted the pepper tree out in front of the city hall, and that pepper tree now is 133 years old. They have tried to do some number of savior kinds of things for that pepper tree, replanting a few of the parts of it, and they've tried to really save it. But pepper trees die from the inside out, so I'm not sure about that pepper tree at this point. This is a list of all the homesteaders that my mother had found, and I share that now with you because, and I don't want to skip around, but to show that the Dameron, there's John Dameron, and I'm going to just point, not zoom in on it, but it is what he bought then. And Harvey Hemingway is up there, and there's more information about that also that I could share possibly at another time. To get into the ranch house, as they called it, right here at City Hall, this is one of the early pictures of it, and we don't know who that is out in the front, but I assume it's Lottie, Charlotte Clapper, Lottie, and some of the children. And the pepper tree isn't noticeable at this point, but I'm sure this is another picture of it. And I believe, and this is what I'm delving into, but I believe that his father, Henry, brought down that 2-story home that was built up on Temple Hills for Frank Goff. I believe that, and what my records look at and see, is they brought it down 3rd Avenue on 2 skids, the front and the back of the house, and brought it down and attached it to the ranch house right here. That gave those 8 children a bedroom upstairs then, a kitchen, a dining room, and a little bit more room to live in. So Henry was instrumental in definitely providing a larger space for that family. This is another picture of it, of course, from the angle that, this is probably that side angle, and that's the 2-story batten board. And George had gotten a lot of the lumber. He went into San Pedro, well, he went into Newport Landing, I believe it is, and he went horse and buggy through the canyon and out and gathered on the best boat that had the best lumber and put it on his wagon and brought it back. The lumber came from Oregon at that time, and they planted, Henry and George hoped that the eucalyptus tree was going to be the miracle wood. It didn't work out that way. When they planted so many eucalyptus trees up on the temple and in the canyon and down on Forest Avenue, which is why it ended up becoming Forest Avenue, they thought that this was going to be the magic tree. Because it warped and it grew very fast, it wouldn't and couldn't be used for furniture or building materials. So unfortunately, it wasn't what they were hoping for. That's, of course, the pepper tree as it stands today and the City Hall. And that's a front view picture of it. George had always wanted, when he bought that homestead right here downtown, he always had a dream to make it into a small city. And there's so much that I'm trying to make sure I stay on track. But he had wanted the tent campers that tented and camped out on Main Beach to have more of a cottage atmosphere to stay in, and also because there were no building supplies down here in Laguna at that time. They had to, like he did, travel into Santa Ana or Tustin or Newport to get their supplies through the canyon with horse and buggy. So he envisioned this area to be small cottages and small businesses that would supply the new people here. So he always had a desire to see this town become what it was. He then went and hired Steele Finley, who was a very well-respected surveyor, and he paid him, and it was not inexpensive. I don't know exactly how much it was, but his father, Henry, either had to sell his homestead to help him, I'm not sure about that, and that's what I'm trying to find out more about, to help pay for the subdivision maps to be developed. So George went on to get his area here subdivided, and he first started with Forest Avenue and Ocean and Beach, and he had planted all the eucalyptus trees with his father on Forest Avenue, and that's why he called it Forest Avenue. He called it Ocean Avenue because from his house under the pepper tree, supposedly, he could see the ocean. So at that point, he had Steele Finley lay out this subdivision map, and I have pictures of the subdivision maps that you could see up close up here if you really wanted to look at it. But there is forest right there, and there's ocean right there, and that, I believe, is beach right there. That was in 1887. In 1888, he wanted to add Mermaid and Park to that, and that's what ended up making it into 323 lots. And they called this the Rogers Addition. Whether it was the Rogers Addition because this was added to that 1887 survey, because it was its own separate survey also, and they combined them together to make it into the whole downtown with 323 lots. So it was not uncommon to sometimes on a subdivision give it that name of the last name of the person who paid for that subdivision to be done. After he had those subdivisions done, he then, with his horse and team of horses, he plowed down and scraped Forest Avenue and Ocean Avenue, and he also then continued to plant those eucalyptus trees. He was, in other words, getting it ready to then sell off some of those lots. This is a picture of that time period. These are some of the tent campers out in the front. There's a wonderful picture of old Laguna that you see just a line of tents. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's a wonderful picture. But now it is here today. Henry sold definitely a lot of lots at that time. I am going to be searching out because I really do want to find out those original owners. But he did sell to his family also. Ora Warling being his daughter or his niece, he was the uncle of Ora. He sold her quite a few of them. Her sister Jenny, my great-grandmother, also bought some. But the one that he sold to Ora, and a number of them, this is the Laguna Beach Laundry, which is right here on Forest Avenue, which is the Forest Mall now, right next to the lumberyard where the Yarses have had theirs. But Ora bought this land. Her daughter Lola ended up having her, and I don't mean to go all over the place with names, but she had her uncle, Henry Wayman, build this laundry. And Ora and her son, Orrin Robbins, whose father was Elmer Robbins, who had the first newspaper, Laguna Life, down here, and who died at a young age. He built this for her, and they slept in the back in tents. This land is still in our family. My cousin Gail Robbins Taggart lives up in Grass Valley, and she owns that land still from her great ancestors, which is kind of fun to think about. I believe this is where that laundry is. I'm not sure. I believe some of the people in this audience could probably tell me a little bit more about it, but it looks like the same length. This is right where Forest, of course, is, and it goes off to Third right there. And this is Ora also with her husband, Oscar Warling. They were very active in Laguna Beach, and they have a lot of stories also, but I don't want to get off into that. But this is called the Warling House. They lived there on Forest Avenue and Pacific Coast Highway. She had gone, let me back up. George had gone with his wife back to Kirksville, Missouri, after he was having trouble. Even though he subdivided Laguna Beach, he was having trouble with his health because of working back there. He sold as much as he could, and also the economy was not as good at that time. So whether he went back for his health and in combination of possibly not being quite encouraged about not being able to sell all those lots, I'm not sure. But Ora, bought the ranch house from her uncle, lived there for 20 years with her husband, Oscar, and then the Women's Club rented that and then eventually bought the ranch house. So in that meantime, she moved into this house, and the Coast Highway came through, and they wanted to build that Coast Highway right through that area, and they were in the way. So the Coast Highway, rather than pay them for that house, Ora and Oscar Warling, they then decided that we'll move the house for you and save you the cost of that. So that house still exists on Diamond and Glen Eyrie. You might see it now that you know it's there. Barbara Diamond, that's right. It doesn't look, they painted it, of course, but bottom line, that's where it's now. So moving on, I want to make sure I haven't kind of slipped through anything. But Ora Warling was quite industrious in getting lots and land. My great-grandmother, Ora's sister, Jenny Wayman Johnson, was also here, and she ended up, after going through a divorce with Edward Bruneau, which is, here's another little extra thing. Edward Bruneau was the brother of John Bruneau. Those two brothers married two sisters, Jenny and her sister, Ora. So bottom line, Ora's husband died, and Jenny, my great-grandmother's husband, they divorced. But when she went back with her sister to Kirksville to convince her uncle to sell her the ranch house property, Jenny met Abe Johnson back there. And so they married and moved out to Irvine Ranch. And a lot of our family lived on the Irvine Ranch because my grandfather's father started the lima bean harvest on the Irvine Ranch. James Irvine I saw what he had done in Ventura and asked him to come and start the lima bean successfully in Irvine Ranch. So it ended up that a lot of our family members lived on the Irvine Ranch helping with those crops. This is my grandmother, Jenny Johnson. My great-grandmother, Jenny Johnson. She was very, as I mentioned, active in Laguna Beach with the Women's Club, and she did a lot of charity work. So they're driving out the canyon, helping people at possibly the hospital in Santa Ana. So she was quite a wonderful lady, and there she is right there. My grandmother was born from Jenny and Jenny's first husband, Edward, and that's why my grandmother's name is Bruno. Jenny and Abe ended up having 3 children of their own. Mary Stromerson, who ended up marrying also, or afterwards, Fred Oftenkamp, so she became Mary Oftenkamp, and her brother, Abe Johnson II, and Wayman Kendall Johnson. So the 3 half brothers and half sister of Lenore were very together and active, and there's a lot of stories about that. Many of them researched and written down by my mother. My mother had a tremendous memory. She graduated valedictorian from her grammar school maybe, and she could remember things incredibly, and she also had a wonderful way of writing everything down. So because of that is why we have so many, beyond what I've shared today, so many wonderful stories that talk about the pier being built with Oscar Warling building it with a few other friends, James Irvine asking him to build a pier in front of the gazebo, which a storm then caused its demise in 1930s. So there's a lot of stories that go along with our family. So this is my mom and dad in 1994 going on to their search together. And my dad was very successful at what he did, but when my mother's heart was so much into the passion that she absolutely was crazy about, that of Laguna Beach history, he supported her, he drove her, he worked with her. He allowed his kitchen table to be cluttered with all that stuff for a very long time. This is when they were young. My dad was in the Navy in Guadalcanal, and they met down at the Balboa Pavilion. They loved to do the Balboa, which was a certain dance at that time, and they all loved dancing. I look at my mother, I look at my grandmother, I look at my daughter, I look at my granddaughter, and I see our same eyes. And that is a legacy in itself, to go back into history and see those eyes come forward. What a thrill that is. So any of you who have that quality that you can look back to your family and go, I have that same nose, I have that same whatever, be thrilled with it. That's part of our legacy. This is a picture of the 4 generations. My mother a few years ago when she was definitely in the midst of Alzheimer's. She's on hospice now. My daughter who's here tonight, Elle, my little granddaughter who's here tonight, and my mother and myself. And my daughter was so desirous of getting this picture. Mom, we got to get a picture with Grandma. We got to get that 4 generations of women. So I'm so glad we have that picture. That's a legacy and a heritage in itself. And this is their family, and this is my son's family. Gabriel's going to be 13 soon, and Jacob is 8. David works for Adobe. He's in charge of their global optimization for global websites for Adobe, and Maria is a family counselor. So that's my legacy that I'm leaving, and I'm working very hard and trying to live my life that legacy then can carry on from my legacy from my ancestors. So this message today was not just to share with you the specifics and the facts of my family, but more than that is to say, oh, let's appreciate those people that came before us. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to carry all that forward, no matter how hard life gets. So this is my mother was the ultimate investigator, detective, researcher, compiler who bubbled over with excitement when she came upon a piece of history that made connections. She shared, I created this map as a remembrance and homage to those 39 homesteaders who have gone before us, and to share it all with those who love Laguna Beach. And there she is at her 92nd birthday in the home she's being cared for. And this is a moment of glee for me because she helped my dad with a very successful bakery, so here she is back in that mode. So that's the end of that presentation. Thank you so much.
Are there any questions for Carol or comments?
Should we turn on the light, Jim?
Carol, can you put the Homestead map up, and let's discuss that.
Okay.
The thing that I wanted to point out, not everyone may be aware of it, is the city of Laguna Beach is made up of 3 townships. So one is Laguna Beach, but at the time people like Villa Rockledge and so forth, Frank Miller, they lived in Arch Beach. Arch Beach was a different town than Laguna Beach, and then South Laguna. So in our history, Arch Beach actually got a postmaster prior to Laguna Beach. When you look at the map, the lines on it all go north and south. So it looks pretty odd, but the grid is true north and south. So the way that the map is broken up is basically Laguna Beach, Arch Beach, and South Laguna. As Carol said, her whatever it is, great uncle George Rogers, that the northern boundary was Broadway, but it was the Laguna Creek. So the Mexican land grant, Rancho San Joaquin, which was purchased by James Irvine, the Irvine Ranch, the border was the Laguna Creek. So basically, half of Main Beach was Irvine Ranch, and the other half was owned by George Rogers. The Mexican land grant to the east of us was owned by the Avila family, which later became the Ralston's Ranch and later became Louis Moulton's ranch, the Moulton Ranch. And as you all know, once you break something up, you can never put it back together. Oh, you do know that what's not true. Here's what happened, or at least this is what they tell us, that of course, the Irvine Ranch, in addition to Rancho San Joaquin, which was about 50,000 acres, James Irvine purchased as much again property. So the Irvine Ranch was 100,000 acres. So these lines, these are going true north and south and true east and west. And on the left side there, the very left side is North Laguna, and the line coming down is Laguna Canyon Road. And of course, why not build the road in the creek? So basically, Laguna Creek and Laguna Canyon Road are the same thing. But so this homestead on the very left bottom, that says John Damron, and
Right here.
Right. Mm-hmm. So he sold it to Cecil and Hiram Brawlson for $500.
Right.
And so whoever the patriarch of the Avilas was died. So the Rancho San Joaquin north of Laguna Beach is 50,000 acres. The Rancho Niguel, Mexican land grant east of Laguna Beach, they have now, well, it's like your family, right? 50, 100 descendants. So they break it all up. They break, 25 lots, 50 lots, 100, all kinds of lots. So Cecil and Hiram Ralston, they go around and they buy each and every one of them, and they put the Ralston's ranch back together, which was later acquired by Louis Moulton, and the Moulton Ranch was later. So, of course, when you're trying to have some real estate deal, you need some money. So the Ralston brothers sold to George Rogers for $1,000 in gold. I was hoping Carol was going to say where this money came from. That sounds like a lot of money.
It is a lot.
In 1880 or something like that. But that was the homestead that he had. So now Merle and Mabel Ramsey wrote Pioneer Days in 1967. There's supposed to be a lot of errors in there, but what he wrote is that George Rogers with his buckboard, went to Seal Beach, what is now Seal Beach, called Anaheim Landing at the time, and that he went to get the lumber to build the old ranch house, and he went there and he unloaded the lumber from the ship himself. So is that story true?
Yep.
And then also in his book, he says, you know, they had all these people from Riverside, Pasadena, and so forth coming in and having tents on the beach. So some year there, George Rogers built an outdoor oven for Lottie to cook bread. And that one of the ways they made money is as those summer visitors came to Laguna Beach, they would be selling, how's he say it? You know, as just right out of the oven, they were selling this bread.
They would line up at the oven.
Okay, so that is true. Also in pioneer days, it says at some point George was away. And there was Lottie with, they got 8 children or something like that, and a mountain lion cougar comes along. What's that story?
Well,
You got to talk to the mic because we're recording this.
he was coming
Carol,
back through.
the mic's over here.
He was coming back through the canyon, and it wasn't his wife at this time, although she was so fearful of those wild animals that he always carried a shotgun. But when he was coming back through the canyon, a mountain lion up in the tree had seen him with the horse and jumped down right next to that horse and screeched very loudly. Now, the story goes that if a lion supposedly screeches and another lion responds to that screech, they will attack that animal. So the story goes, it's so thankful that another lion didn't screech and support him, and the mountain lion went away. So that saved George's life, and it saved our lives. So another story was a woman was coming down the canyon during that time, and she was told, and everybody, or not everybody, but a number of people were told that if one of those bobcats, mountain lions, oh gosh, they had a tremendous amount of squirrels to the point that they were obnoxious. But if anybody had one of those following them, you throw your hat at it, and it will attack the hat, and then you would escape, of which this lady did. So Gina's right, there were tremendous amount of, and he built that oven to help ward off a number of those animals. But she was very successful in that one summer, I believe it was, 88 loaves of bread that she sold? Maybe that's where the money came from.
No, first you have to pay the $1,000 in gold, then you've got to cook the bread. So that doesn't work out at all. I want to point out, those of you who've interested in acquiring a copy of this Homestead map, the question, of course, where you live in Laguna Beach, what homestead are you in? And so as Carol indicated, what Burrell did was to superimpose this over a 1990-something map. So you can see the various streets and where they come from. I live up in top of the world, and it's a doozy. I'm very close to 3 different homesteads, and it kind of explains why some of the lots are built the way they are. Our board member Eric Jessen brought the Cal State Fullerton Oral History Program, and I've read a couple of them where the oral history took place a little too late. So what was that? I don't remember. What did you do for fun? Fun. But the 1995 interview with Burl Wilson Viebeck, she's sharp as a tack. As a matter of fact, you've got to think reading it, she's cheating, and she's got, index cards by her, because she will mention people's names, not their first name and their last name, but they'll mention as the information that Carol has there. Boom, 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 boom. And so I recommend that you borrow from Eric or from me the oral history of Burl Wilson. It's Burl Wilson Viebeck, the 1995 interview. It is very definitive in all the information they have. One thing, though, I thought I'd correct and expand on where you talk about the pier. there are some photos of the, let's see, what do they call it? The Ish and Warling Palace?
The palace stable.
Well, they call it a palace, though, don't they? Livery stables. So this is before cars, where they had horses. And so they were partners. And the first main beach pier, off of where the gazebo is, off of what is now Las Brisas, the homeowners by themselves built the bridge in 1896. And so Nick Ish and Oscar Warling, they're all ready to build it, except they need materials and they don't have any money. So they get $100 from James Irvine. They buy enough material with $100 to build a pier, which kind of shows you that $1,000 was such a holy moly. That you could build 10 piers with that if you got free labor. And so that pier lasted about 20 years. So by about 1916, it was bye-bye. And then the second main beach pier was built in 1926 by Tony Durkham. Hell, they even got permission from the War Department to build it. So we were first class. And that's the pier. It's the second pier that was destroyed by the so-called hurricane of 1939. So that's right. If you're keeping notes, the first pier built by the villagers lasted 20 years, and the second, authorized by the federal government, lasted 13 years. So,
and you can still see those pilings, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting to look down into the tide pools? And Lottie Rogers, George's wife, would bathe her babies down in those tide pools. And the summer heat would warm that water, and that was her favorite place. And these are all stories from my incredibly memory, whatever mother.
I'm talking to the microphone, we're recording this. But I understand that the weather was always mild then, is that correct?
I don't know, but all I know
it's going to be hot today and tomorrow.
Yeah, it would be a great time to go down to those tide pools and take a bath.
So the family came from Galena, Illinois. Is that the town that Ulysses S. Grant came from?
Yes.
Yes. And he recruited a tremendous amount of soldiers from that town, of which one of them was Henry Wayman, who fought in the Civil War. He was a teamster, and he would go out to the front line and take the men out to the front line on a wagon. This is Henry Wayman, the husband of Mary Wayman. He would take them out there, and they would fight, and he would bring them back. He would go back out and bring them back. He was injured tremendously, and that's where he was offered, instead of payment, he was offered a homestead. So that's what they did. If you were injured in the war, you could have, the bounty was a homestead or you got pay. And many of them took, of course, the pay, but he had his eyes on that homestead out here.
Carol, I think you said your mother now is 93. I kind of remember her photo in the local papers I saw when she was 75. So that would be, does anybody do math? Is there a mathematician in the house? 18 years ago. Thank you very much. I'm kidding. What do you think? I can't even. Right? Holy moly. So anyway, that was about the palm tree, where the Murphy Smith Bungalow, the headquarters of the Laguna Beach Historical Society, is at 278 Ocean Avenue. Across the street, there's a palm tree. So what's the story on that?
Well, when my mother was born, her grandmother had a home right across from Wells Fargo, of which I have pictures, and that's a whole story unto itself. But when my mother was born, the day they were born, they planted that palm tree, so that palm tree is 93 years old. And it's very single by itself, so you'll see that. You look for that, it's right there. And I love to see that, because my mother would come down here so often, but when she did, she'd go, see that palm tree? That's for my birthday. So I hope they don't cut it down.
Now, One of the things that's difficult to do is to get historical facts straight. What we've managed to do here is have a newsletter that says George Rogers and his daughter Elizabeth Lizzie planted the pepper tree, and then at the program we have you tell us that George Rogers and his oldest daughter Sarah planted the pepper tree. Was our newsletter incorrect?
No, Sarah's name was Elizabeth Sarah. She went by the Lizzie, which is of course abbreviated version of Elizabeth. So that was the oldest daughter, who was Sarah, but she went by Lizzie, and her full name was Elizabeth Sarah.
The reason I'm trying to encourage you to speak in the microphone is that sometimes when people watch the DVD, they'll have somebody who's not talking to the microphone who's saying something, but you can't hear it, and they kind of miss out. One of the interesting things here in Laguna Beach, California, is the president of the Laguna Greenbelt is Elizabeth Brown, and she spells her name not with a Z, but with an S.
Yes.
And so does the Rogers
Right.
Elizabeth is with an S.
Right, with an S.
Where's that come from?
I don't know.
Did you notice that the?
I think it's kind of pretty, though, don't you? With an S.
Well, I'll
versus a Z.
tell you that Elizabeth Brown is particular about it, so if anybody who writes her a note, get it right. When you showed the Rogers edition, the last name is Rogers.
Right.
And so on the the experts up in Santa Ana misspelt the name? They've got it.
Well, it should have an apostrophe after the S. Is that what you're saying? Is it not?
On the plot, they
Right.
have Roger with possessive tense.
Right, it should be Rogers apostrophe.
So you get what you pay for.
That's right.
There you go.
These are hard, tough questions, Gene.
Well, this is one of the things that shows the dedication that Burl went to get everything exactly right and so forth. And I guess what they call this is primary research.
Right.
What I'm chit-chatting about is I read a book by Merle Ramsey and not checking on things. But in the slides that went by, it was Roger instead of Rogers, which offhand it should have been.
Right.
So, any questions, comments?
Eric Jessen knew my parents wonderfully. He was in Santa Ana, head of the
Harbors, Beaches, and Parks.
Harbors, Beaches, and Parks.
I'm not going to loan out my only copy of Beryl Viebeck's oral history. As many of you know, Cal State Fullerton is the main powerhouse that does these interviews and produces these oral histories, which if they are become over the years, they finally get bound, and they're available at the Laguna Beach Library.
Yes.
But that's not why I came up here. I came up here to tell you that about a year after I joined Harbors, Beaches, and Parks and had to move into downtown Santa Ana, my staff started ordering birthday cakes for me every year for the office, and 20 consecutive birthday cakes were made by her parents, one of which was the shape of the Italian peninsula, one of which is a Roman Colosseum, one of which was Niagara Falls, one of which was Mount Whitney. They were, forests and Mount Rainier. They were just the most outrageous three-dimensional cakes. They were just terrible tragedy to have to cut into them and eat them. But anyway, that was Viebeck's Bakery, which was on South Main, I think, maybe south of 1st Street, but north of Sears, right?
300 block
Yeah.
from Clark Dye.
Yeah,
And
Clark
when
Dye, the big
Santa
hardware
Ana
store.
was the county seat, and it was a rip-roaring city.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was.
yeah. Anyway, it was really
Thank you,
great.
Eric.
Took 40 years to lose all the weight I gained on those cakes.
I'm still with you.
Very good. With the Historical Society, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. If you didn't sign in, there's a sign-in sheet, and we'd love to invite you to join if you're not currently a member. So be sure to sign on the way out. Thank you for coming, and good night.
Let me just mention the next program is going to be Tuesday, May 27th, and it is the 25th anniversary of the starting of the Tell in Laguna Canyon, which commenced on May 1st, 1989. That was an almost 700-foot-long photographic mural, collaborative artwork by Mark Chamberlain and Jerry Birchfield. Jerry Birchfield recently passed away, but Mark Chamberlain will be here on May 27th to give us the 25th anniversary of the tell. And so we welcome you there. We have newsletters back there which have information about becoming members if you're interested. And we have envelopes addressed to the Laguna Beach Historical Society. The idea there is if you have a program, if you have a question that you'd like us to research or find the answer for, if you'd like to send us money, we have maintenance issues with the Murphy Smith bungalow that we would appreciate donations to the maintenance fund. If you have a complaint, just send it to us and we'll have the board review it. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you for coming and good night.
Just a map up in front. You can look at the original map and come up, fill in your comment question cards if you can. And my little grandchildren in blue and this little thing in pink. We'll collect your comment and question cards. I'd love to have you.
So,
You're in 5 months. L. Arden Wallace, girlfriend. See the eyes? See, that's what, when you see those grandparents, and you see that grandparent, and you see your mother, and you see this. I see my daughter's eyes. I love seeing her eyes. And this is one such. But thank you, friends. All my friends who came here to support me, I absolutely am thrilled to see. I feel like it's a party. All my friends.
So the Homestead map is not available elsewhere. If you want a copy, here's your opportunity.